Willie Winkie by Hans Christian Andersen. Nobody in the world knows so many stories as Willie Winkie, and he knows how to tell them too, no doubt about that. Late in the evening, when children are sitting nice and quietly at the table, or on their stools, that's when Willie Winkie comes along. He comes ever so softly up the stairs, for he goes in his stocking feet, and he very gently opens the door. Then, he squirts sweet milk into the children's eyes, only the tiniest drop, yet always enough to stop them keeping their eyes open, and so they don't see him. He steals up just behind them and gently blows down their necks, and then their heads grow heavy. It's all right, it doesn't hurt them, because Willie Winkie is really most kind to children. All he wants is to see them quiet down, and for that it's best to get them to bed. They must be quite still before he can tell them stories. When at last the children are asleep, Willie Winkie sits down on the bed. He's nicely dressed, and his coat's made of some sort of silk, though it's hard to say what colour it is, for as he turns about it's all shot with green and red and blue. Under each arm he carries an umbrella. One umbrella, with pictures on it, he holds over the good children, so that they have the loveliest dreams all night. The other umbrella, without anything on it, he holds over the naughty children, so that they sleep like logs, and when they wake in the morning haven't dreamt a thing. Now you shall hear how Willie Winkie came every night for a whole week to a little boy called Hjalmar, and the stories he told him. There are 7 stories altogether, for there are 7 days in the week. Monday. "Now look here," said Willie Winkie one evening, when he had got Hjalmar to bed. "First, I'm going to smarten things up." And straight away all the flowers in the flower pots became large trees, stretching their long branches up under the ceiling and along the walls, until the whole room was turned into a lovely bower, and all the branches were full of blossom. Every flower was prettier than a rose, with a delicious smell, and, if you cared to taste it, was sweeter than jam. The fruit all glistened like gold, and there were buns that were bursting with currants. You never saw anything like it. But all at once there began a most dreadful hullabaloo over in the drawer where Hjalmar kept his schoolbooks. "What's up now?" said Willie Winkie, as he went over to the table and opened the drawer. It was the slate that was in such distress, because the wrong figure had got into the sum, so that it wouldn't come right. The pencil frisked and gambolled at the end of a string, like a little dog. It wanted to help the sum, but didn't know how to. Next there was a howling set up from inside Hjalmar's copybook. It was simply ghastly to listen to. Running down every page were all the capital letters, each with a small letter beside it, a complete row of them the whole way down. They acted as a copy, and beside them were also some letters which imagined that they looked like the copy ones. Hjalmar had written these, and they straggled about almost as if they had tumbled over the ruled line they were supposed to stand on. "Look here, this is how you ought to hold yourselves," said the copy. "Look, sloping a bit like this, with a free swinging stroke." "Ah, we should so like to," said Hjalmar's letters, "but we can't, we're feeling so bad." "Then you must have a dose of medicine," said Willie Winkie. "Oh no," they screamed, and at once they stood up straight as you could wish for. "There, that's enough storytelling for the present," said Willie Winkie. "Now I must put them through their drill. Left, right, and he drilled the letters until they stood up firm and straight as any copy ones. But after Willie Winkie had gone, and Hjalmar looked at them the next morning, they were just as miserable looking as before. Tuesday. Directly Hjalmar was in bed, Willie Winkie touched all the furniture in the room with his little magic squirt, and they immediately began to chatter. They all chattered about themselves, except the spittoon, which stood in silent annoyance that the others could be so conceited as to talk and think only of themselves, and never have a thought for the one who, after all, stood so modestly in the corner and let himself be spat upon. Over the chest of drawers hung a large painting in a gilt frame. It showed a landscape with tall venerable trees, flowers growing in the meadow, and a great broad stream curving round behind a wood, past many a castle, far out into the open sea. Willie Winkie touched the painting with his magic squirt, and the birds in it at once began to sing. The branches stirred in the trees, and the clouds scudded along, and you could see their shadow drifting over the fields. Willie Winkie took little Hjalmar and lifted him up to the picture frame, and Hjalmar put his feet into the picture, right into the tall grass. There he stood, with the sun shining down on him through the branches of the trees. He ran down to the water and got into a little boat that was lying there. It was painted red and white, and its sails shone like silver. 6 swans, all with gold crowns down over their necks, and a glittering blue star on their heads, towed the boat past the green woods, where the trees were telling tales about robbers and witches, and the flowers had stories of the dear little elves and all they had heard from the butterflies. The loveliest fishes, with scales like gold and silver, swam after the boat, leaping up now and then, so that there was an answering splash in the water, and the birds flew behind in 2 long rows, red birds and blue birds, big ones and little ones. The gnats kept dancing round, and the cockchafer repeated his boom, boom. They all wanted to go with Hjalmar, and each of them had a story to tell. Yes, it was a wonderful sail they went for. At one moment the woods were quite thick and dark, and then suddenly they were like a beautiful garden with flowers and sunshine, and there appeared great castles of glass and marble, with princesses on the balconies, who were all little girls that Hjalmar knew well and had played with. They reached out their hands, and each one was holding the nicest sugar pig any sweet shop could sell. Hjalmar caught hold of one end of a sugar pig as he sailed past, and the princess held on tight to the other, so they each got a piece. She got the smallest, and Hjalmar got the biggest. Little princes, with gold swords carried at the salute, were on guard at every castle, and they showered him with toffee and tin soldiers. They were proper princes. Sometimes Hjalmar was sailing through forests, and sometimes through what seemed to be immense halls, or through the middle of a town. In this way he came to the home of the nurse who had looked after him when he was quite small. She had been very fond of him, and now she nodded and waved her hand, singing the pretty verses she had made up herself and sent to Hjalmar. Of you, dear Hjalmar, I often think, and how as a babe I kissed you, on forehead and mouth and cheeks so pink. My darling, how much I've missed you. Your earliest words I heard you crow, but soon from your side was driven. God grant you his blessing here below, sweet messenger sent from heaven. And all the birds joined in her song. The flowers danced on their stalks, and the old trees nodded, just as if Willie Winkie were telling them stories too. Wednesday. Goodness, how the rain was coming down outside. Hjalmar could hear it in his sleep, and when Willie Winkie opened a window, the water came right up to the sill. There was a complete lake outside, but a splendid-looking ship lay aside the house. "Hjalmar, my boy, will you come for a sail?" asked Willie Winkie. "Then you'll be able to go off to foreign parts tonight and be back again in the morning." And all of a sudden Hjalmar found himself standing in his Sunday best on board the splendid ship, and the weather at once became fine. She sailed through the streets, cruised round the church, and finally came out into open sea. On and on they sailed, until the land was quite out of sight. They came upon a flock of storks, who were also leaving home and were bound for the warm countries. They were flying one behind the other, and had already flown a very long way. One of the storks was so tired that his wings could hardly beat him up any longer. He was the very last in the row, and he soon got a long way behind. Finally he sank with his outspread wings lower and lower. He gave a few more beats with his wings, but that was no good, and then his feet touched the ship's rigging. He glided down the sail, and plomp, there he was on the deck. Then the ship's boy picked him up and put him in the hen coop among hens, ducks, and turkeys. The poor stork looked so sorry for himself amongst them. "What a creature," said all the hens. And the turkey cock puffed himself up as big as he could and asked who he was. And the ducks waddled backwards and nudged each other. "Quick, get quacking." Then the stork told about the warmth of Africa and the pyramids and the ostrich that ran like a wild horse through the desert. But the ducks never understood what he was saying, and so they nudged each other again. "We all agree, don't we, that he's a stupid?" "As stupid as can be," said the turkey cock with a gobble-gobble. At that the stork kept silent and thought about his beloved Africa. "Those are nice lanky legs you have," said the turkey. "How much a yard?" "Quack, quack, quack," chuckled the ducks, and the stork pretended not to hear. "You may as well join in the laugh," said the turkey to him. It was very neatly put. Or was it perhaps too low for him? Hi-ho, he's a bit one-eyed. We must look to ourselves if we want to have some fun. And that clucked away, and the ducks kept quack, quack, quacking. It was terrible how funny they seemed to think it was. But Hjalmar went over to the hen coop, opened the door, and called to the stork, who then hopped out onto the deck. He had now had a good rest, and seemed to give Hjalmar a nod in order to thank him. The next moment he spread out his wings and flew off to the warm countries. But the hens went on clucking, and the ducks went on quacking, while the turkey cock became quite red in the face. "Tomorrow we shall make soup of you," said Hjalmar, and then he woke up. There he was, lying in his little bed. It really was an astonishing voyage Willie Winkie had arranged for him that night. Thursday. "What do you think I've got here?" said Willie Winkie. "Now don't get frightened. I'm going to show you a little mouse." And there was the dainty little creature in Willie Winkie's hand as he held it out to him. "It has come," he said, "to invite you to a wedding. There are 2 little mice here tonight who are entering into matrimony. They live down under the floor of your mother's larder. It ought to be a charming affair." "But how am I to get through the tiny mouse hole in the floor?" asked Hjalmar. "Leave that to me," said Willie Winkie. "I know how to make you small enough." And he touched Hjalmar with his magic squirt so that he at once became smaller and smaller, and at last was no bigger than your finger. "Now we can borrow the tin soldier's clothes. I think they'll fit you, and it looks so smart to be wearing uniform at a party." "Rather," said Hjalmar, and the next moment there he was, dressed as the most dapper-looking tin soldier. "If you'll kindly take a seat in your mother's thimble," said the little mouse, "I'll do myself the honour of pulling you along." "Good gracious, Miss Mouse," said Hjalmar, "to think of me giving you all that trouble." And off they drove to the mouse wedding. First they made their way in under the floor by a long passage that was just high enough and no more for them to be able to drive along in a thimble, and the whole passage was lit up by touchwood. "Doesn't it smell nice?" said the mouse who was pulling him. "That whole passage has been rubbed with bacon rind. There's nothing to touch it." Now they entered the wedding chamber. To the right stood all the little she-mice, twittering and tittering as if they were making fun of each other. To the left stood all the he-mice, stroking their whiskers with their paws. But out in the middle of the floor were the bridal pair, standing in a scooped-out cheese and kissing each other like anything in front of everybody. Well, after all, they were engaged and were going to be married almost at once. More and more guests kept arriving, and the mice looked like trampling each other to death. The bride and bridegroom had stationed themselves in the middle of the doorway, so there was no getting either out or in. The whole room, like the passage, had been rubbed with bacon rind, which was all the refreshment there was, but for dessert there was produced a pea in which a mouse belonging to the family had nibbled the name of the bridal pair, or rather the first letter. That was considered something altogether out of the ordinary. All the mice agreed that it was a lovely wedding, and that they had talked with such interesting people. Finally, Valmar drove home again. He had certainly been in very smart society. On the other hand, he had to put up with no end of a shrinking to make himself small enough to get into a tin soldier's uniform. Friday. You'd never believe how many elderly people would like to get hold of me, said Willie Winkie, especially the ones who've done something they shouldn't. Dear kind Winkie, they say to me, we can't shut our eyes at night, and so we lie awake and see our evil deeds sitting on the edge of the bed like hideous little goblins and squirting us with hot water. Do come and chase them away, so that we can get a good sleep. And then they add with a deep sigh, we're only too glad to pay. Good night, Winkie. The money's in the window. But I don't do it for the money, said Willie Winkie. Now, what are we going to have tonight? Asked Hjalmar. Well, I don't know if you'd care to go to another wedding. Quite a different sort to yesterday's, I may say. Your sister's big doll, the one that looks like a man and is called Herman, is to marry the doll Bertha. And as it's Bertha's birthday, there will be a lot of presents. Yes, I know what that means, said Hjalmar. Whenever the dolls want new clothes, my sister lets them have a birthday or a wedding. That must have happened 100 times. Well, but tonight's wedding is the 101st time, and when number 101 is over, there won't be any more. That's why it's going to be so brilliant. Just look. And Hjalmar looked across at the table. There stood the little cardboard box of lights in the windows, and all the tin soldiers were presenting arms outside. The bride and bridegroom were seated on the floor, leaning up against the leg of the table and looking very thoughtful, as indeed they might well do. But Willie Winkie draped himself in Granny's black petticoat and married them. When the wedding was over, all the furniture in the room joined in singing the following beautiful song, which had been written by the pencil and went to the tune of the Devil's Tattoo. Our song shall greet like wind and weather these two that the priest has tied together, so poker stiff they stand in tether, each of them made of chamois leather. Hurrah for bride and groom together, hurrah for them both in wind and weather. Next came the wedding presents. They had said they would rather not have any eatables, as their love was enough for them to live on. What do you think? Said the bridegroom to his bride. Shall we go and stay in the country, or shall we travel abroad? They asked advice of the swallow, who was a great traveller, and of the old hen, who had hatched 5 broods of chicks. The swallow described the lovely warm countries, where the grapes hang in big heavy bunches, and the air is so soft, and the colour on the hills is something quite unknown to us here. Still, they haven't got our garden cabbage, said the hen. I once spent the summer with all my chicks in the country. There was a gravel pit we could go and scratch in, and then we had the use of the garden where there were cabbages. Such a green they were. I can't imagine anything lovelier. But one cabbage stalk looks just like another, said the swallow. And then again, the weather here is so often bad. Oh well, we're used to that, replied the hen. But it's so cold, it freezes. That just suits the cabbages, said the hen. Besides, we get warm weather too sometimes. Don't you remember? Only 4 years ago we had a summer that lasted 5 weeks. It was so hot here that you could hardly breathe. And then we don't get all those poisonous creatures they have abroad, and we are free from brigands. Anyone who doesn't think our country is the best of all is a scoundrel. He doesn't really deserve to live here. And tears came into the hen's eyes. I've done a bit of travelling myself, she added. I've ridden over 50 miles in a coupe. There's no fun at all in travel. Yes, the hen's a sensible woman, said the doll Bertha. I don't want to go mountaineering either. It only means that first you go up and then you go down. No, let's move out to the gravel pit and go for a walk in the cabbage patch. And that's how they left it. Saturday. "Any stories for me tonight?" asked little Hjalmar, as soon as Willie Winkie had got him to bed. "We haven't time for that this evening," said Winkie, as he opened above him the umbrella with the prettiest pictures on. "Take a peep at those Chinese." And the whole umbrella looked like a great Chinese bowl, with blue trees and bridges and pointed arches, where there were little Chinese who stood nodding their heads. "We must have everything trim and tidy for tomorrow," said Winkie. "You see, it's a holiday. It's Sunday. I must go up the church tower and see if little church elves are cleaning the bells, so that they ring out nicely. I must get along to the fields and see if the breezes are blowing the dust off the grass and the leaves. And then, what is really my hardest task, I must have all the stars down and give them a thorough polish. I take them into my apron, but first each one of them has to be numbered, and the holes they fit into up there must also be numbered, so that they can find their right places again. Otherwise they wouldn't fit tight, and we should get too many shooting stars, as they dropped out one after the other." "I say, look here, Mr. Winkie," said an old portrait hanging on the wall of Hjalmar's bedroom. "I'm Hjalmar's great-grandfather. Thank you for telling the boy these stories, but you mustn't muddle him with wrong ideas. The stars can't be taken down and polished. A star is a globe, the same as the earth is. That's just the beauty of it." "Thanks very much, old great-grandfather," said Willie Winkie. "Thanks very much. You're, of course, the head of the family, the grand old man, but I'm older than you are. I'm an ancient heathen. The Romans and Greeks called me the dream god. I visit the very best houses continually, and I know how to get on with all sorts, both young and old. Now you can tell a story of your own." And Willie Winkie picked up his umbrella, and away he went. "Dear, dear," said the old portrait, "one mayn't even express one's opinion nowadays." And at that moment Hjalmar woke up. Sunday. "Good evening," said Willie Winkie, and Hjalmar nodded. But then he jumped up and turned his great-grandfather's portrait with its face to the wall, so that it shouldn't butt into the conversation as it did the day before. "Please tell me some stories. The one about the 5 peas that lived in a pod, and the one about the cock-a-doodle-doo that made love to the hen-a-doodle-doo, and the one about the darning needle who was so stuck up that she fancied she was a sewing needle." "Ah, but one can have too much of a good thing," said Willie Winkie. "I'd rather show you something. I tell you what, I'll show you my brother. He never comes to anyone more than once, and when he comes, he takes them up on his horse and tells them stories. He only knows 2. One is so utterly beautiful that no one on earth can imagine it, and the other is so ghastly and terrible, well, it's impossible to describe it." Then Willie Winkie lifted little Hjalmar up to the window and said, "Look, there's my brother. He's also called Death. You see, he's nothing like so horrid to look at as he is in his pictures, where he's nothing but a skeleton. No, he has a silver lace on his tunic. It's a splendid hussar uniform, with a black velvet coat flying behind him over his horse. Look how he gallops along." And Hjalmar saw how this other Winkie rode away, taking both young and old on his horse. Some he placed in front of him, others behind, but he always asked them first, "What does it say in your report?" "Good," they all answered. "Ah, but let me see it myself," he said. Then they had to show him the report, and all the ones who had very good or excellent came to the front seat on the horse and were told the beautiful story. But those who had moderate or poor had to sit behind and hear the terrible story. They trembled and wept and tried to jump off the horse, but they couldn't do that because they had immediately grown fast onto it. "But Death is a most wonderful Willie Winkie," said Hjalmar. "I'm not a bit afraid of him." "No, and you needn't be," said Willie Winkie. "Mind you get a good report, that's all." "Most instructive," murmured the great-grandfather's portrait. "It does some good after all to express one's opinion." And he was quite contented. "There, That's the story of Willie Winkie. Now this evening he can tell you some more himself.